2-minute, more than intro, IVK. What do you think, where do we think we are from an angel investment or a deep tech perspective? Mostly deep tech from you. I'll ask the other two to cover on the angel investment. And then we'll spend a bit of time on the disruption.
Okay, thank you, Ravi. Can you hear me? I think you can. So my name is Vijaya Kumar, IVK in short. Spent maybe about 33, 34 years in IT industry, about 22 plus in Wipro. For last 12 years in startups. My association with venture capital started in 1998. That's a long way. I have done both corporate venture stuff, CTO stuff, innovation, and also as an angel. Coming to my deep tech comments, since I serve on many of the jury panels, covering many domains, primarily with tech as the common space, 3 things I want to say. One is, I think almost every institute, if it is academic institute or a corporate, they invariably have today an innovation program or a startup program. That was not the case maybe 10, 15 years ago. So I think that's a good thing. So almost every institute or every corporate will have some program called innovation or startup, and they invariably have some connection with startups, so which is good. The second part is on the funding or grants, I would say. I mean, from the days I used to work in Indian defense systems, we have come a long way. We are one of the first partners to collaborate with defense as a corporate. That itself was a big step. Today, we have many programs with any of the state or central sponsored programs. And they do engage with startups and primarily in deep tech. So that is the good part. So whether it is IDEX or BIRAC in biotech, or many other forums. So I think that is the fact that you can get grants and maybe some engagements as well is a good trend, I would say. The third one, I would say, on the venture capital side, that you do have specialized funds which are focused a little more thematically in deep tech. So I think it also gives you a good combination that the investors who have the funds also seem to have the domain knowledge, and hence they can help beyond capital. So I think those are 3 good things which happen in deep tech.
Sure, we'll come to the BIRAC and IDEX piece. Vinod, your experience on what has changed from, I know we have invested together starting a decade ago plus, right? So what do you think has changed?
So
quick introduction of yourself.
Yeah, first. Sure, okay. So for people who don't know me, my name is Vinod Keni. The other thing I also want to say is I'm a Bangalore. I know everybody still thinks I live in Bombay, which is not the case. I am a hardcore Bangalore, and I'm back in Bangalore now. I run a fund called QI Ventures. I'm actually an accidental VC. I never really started out to being an investor. Had sold a business and was trying to figure out what to do till my wife kicked me out and said, go do something productive, and I ended up in being a VC. Largely come from a finance background, so unlike people in the panel, I'm not a techie, so I don't really understand much, but I look at it purely from a business perspective. And I think I have now, at least because of experience, learned how to really evaluate even deep tech startups purely from a commercial perspective. Coming back to what you said, I mean, when we were investing, of course, I started investing as an angel in the 90s in the US. And you know, when we started, it was very early days, right? And it was almost like a country club, very few. But I think that set the stage for where it has come today, right? I think there was, you know, involvement and engagement of the investors with some of the companies. And that engagement actually, I think, helped a lot of those early stage businesses become successful and get to a stage where they are today. I mean, a lot of these are names that you would recognize who were early targets for some of the angels that actually invested in them. So from that perspective, I think that was the stage which actually set for where it has actually come today. And I think that was a good stage, right? I mean, that foundation has been fairly strong here. We have progressed amazingly, right? I mean, if you go out there and look at the state of angel investing, it has truly started becoming democratic. I mean, you will be surprised to see the kind of investors who are now investing in startups and the number of startups that are able to actually attract capital at that early stage. But still a long way to go, considering the potential that the country has and the potential that this asset class has. And even in the early stage VC system where, July, you guys work, where I work, all of that, I think there's a lot of progress and a lot of developments that are really good, but more to come, and I think exciting times.
Sure, thanks. Priyank, your introduction, and maybe touch upon the fact that you've been part of an angel network, right? I don't know how many of them I've worked through. I can, as compared to a VC or as compared to friends and family, I think that's the first check that goes out. So your experiences and how that has developed over the last decade or so, depending.
Thanks, Ravi. So just to quickly introduce myself, Priyank Garg, now a managing partner with IN Alpha Fund, the second fund from the Indian Angel Network Group. And I've been an angel investor ever since roughly around the time I returned back from Valley. Having worked post my master's and undergrad in computer science, in technology, whether it was virtualization or search. Started investing in 2007, and then joined the Indian Angel Network around 14 years ago. So it's been 14 years now for myself also. Not as long as all of you gentlemen, but all of my investing experience has been in India. And it's been, I was just thinking back, looking at my portfolio before this panel, over these 14 years, the dramatic shift that you see in how the ecosystem has evolved, right? All of you would know this or have experienced this when 10 years ago, roughly, when you would have investments coming in, it would be, a young rebel who's saying, this has been done in the US, this has been done in China, now we can do it in India. And by the way, my family thinks I'm stupid to give up that cushy MNC or TCS job, but I can do this. And that's what angel investing would be. And now you see young founders coming out with fundamental innovation, not just for India, but for the world, not been done ever before, and with their whole family and their whole, the whole ecosystem being, recognizing that, hey, this is a career move. This is not a rebellious risk. And so the whole spectrum of investing has changed. But even within that, if you think back, I mean, I'll take a digression. If you talk to some people in the US, they talk about, recently I was talking to a potential investor and he asked me, funds in the US, when they look at investments, they say 90 failed, 10 succeeded, or 92 failed, 8 succeeded. You say you have only 30 failed, 70 doing something positive. How is that? And that is the indication of what is the level of fundamental, deep tech risk that is being taken in the Indian ecosystem. Nothing to say, it's not a value judgment, by the way. It's a matter of where we are as a society. There's a lot of market gaps. There are a lot of needs that can be fulfilled with very successful businesses that need not go into core science innovation. But even there, think back, the first 10 years of investing, I counted like 3, what I would call deep tech investments. What do I mean by deep tech, right? That is a question that I think is also very fluid in
I was
the ecosystem.
Come to that piece, right?
Yeah.
So in your mind, what is deep tech?
So
how is that
so
changed?
the way I see it in India, anything that gets a patent is a deep tech. That's how it was. It is changing. That's how it used to be, right? If you're doing a business model innovation and you're doing something, and that, by the way, again, not a value judgment, purely a matter of characteristic. Anything that gets IP, which may be application-based IP only, also would become deep tech. It's kind of doing some patented-based innovation, etc. Whereas the MIT definition of deep tech is around being on the frontier of science and engineering, which has pushing the boundaries where you may have a technology or a capability that maybe have multiple optional applications, needs much longer gestation periods, and maybe even breaking boundaries of regulation science. And so if you look at just the kind of deep tech innovation when you have science institutes like an IISc or not even I'm talking IIT, but IISc, deep science innovation. At that level of innovation, the first 10 years, I would count probably two or three.
Right.
If you look at some of the well-known names from my portfolio, Dhruva Software, not deep tech, it's tech. It was what would be called deep tech then, but not in that fundamental definition. Unifor would be deep tech, I would say.
Right.
There were others. Some of them turned out to be not genuine. Now, but you look at the last 5 years, you see this fundamental innovation. You see innovation that is global, that is pushing the boundaries. And I count in 5 years, 3 or 4 investments that are 5 investments that are in this MIT definition of deep tech. So that is a big change that I see happening.
Sure. Vinod, going back on a reverse round robin pace. We've always had this problem on the definition of time, right? One was the definition of what is deep tech. The other definition is the whole time frame. We have talked about patient capital or a need for patient capital when it comes to tech, right? No, when I say tech, deep tech, right? Notwithstanding computational tech, I'm also going out and talking about materials, science, the ones tomorrow you want to talk about sustainability. There were lots of people trying to talk about sustainability.
Even as fundamental as biotech as well.
As fundamental as biotech, right? So what is this dichotomy? In the sense, are we going to come out of this, the 227 plus 1 plus 1, 8 plus 1 plus 1 VC model, or do you see that being layered separately as you go through from a funding perspective? I'm putting it to you because I know I can then counterbalance that with the technology expectation.
So, look, I think worldwide, there is now an acknowledgement that the VC tenure, as we call it, right? The VC tenure needs to change.
So just for those people, all VCs raise funds on a tenure, on a fixed tenure.
On a fixed tenure.
So we do a 7-year fund, or we do a 8-year fund, or we do a 10-year fund. That itself is changing. So you just heard Sequoia has spun off independently. About 8 months ago, they announced that they are going to take that and create that as an evergreen fund. This is the first evergreen fund ever done by a VC, right? So, okay,
No,
sorry.
it's not the first one, because there are multiple.
There are multiple ones. Sequoia's first.
Sequoia is the first. Sequoia's first one, right? So I think that is also an acknowledgement of the fact that there is a longer gestation period in tech, right? That it needs not only multiple levels of capital and multiple rounds of capital, but it also needs patience from a investor perspective as well, right? So there's no pressure on the teams to actually try and say that we need to actually now try and start really accelerating this, in which case then it may not necessarily be as effective. So I think that acknowledgement is starting to come into the world of LPs, especially institutional LPs, all of them. But that, I think, has still not really changed in the Indian context, right? The Indian context, I think, largely a lot of the LPs, and here our LP base may not be necessarily as deep and as wide as maybe some of the other ones are. And
LPs, for those again, are limited partners who actually put money into venture funds.
Yeah. So I think that expectation is still that look, I have other asset classes that I can always look at, and if I look at it from that return perspective, this is too long time frame. But I think as there is more and more deepening of the LP ecosystem, and there's a deepening of the investor ecosystem as well, I think that's going to start changing. And you're going to start seeing more and more longer tenure VC funds, and investors who also believe in that whole patient capital concept of wanting to do that. But I think fundamentally, especially in those early stages where you need capital, and some of that is highly risk, right? It's severe risk capital. I think that's still going to come from some of these shorter tenured funds where they potentially may be looking at saying, look, I will go ahead and still invest, but hopefully I'll get an exit within the time frame that I'm supposed to get. Not necessarily going to get a big bang IP or a big bang M&A happening, but maybe a secondary that could potentially give me some level of this.
I'll come back to the unicorn big bang piece.
Yeah.
So, IVK, from your experience, let's take IDEX as an example, right? And for those of you who don't know what IDEX is an incubator funded primarily by the defense. I know you can give better
They
pieces.
source startups using IDEX program to solve the problems of Indian defense. Cover Army, Navy, Air Force.
And the last comment I heard from Vish is the guy who runs it in Coimbatore, was that they now have grants, and get this, they now have grants which is equity free of being able to do up to 7 crores. He says just short of $1 million, right? Which is kind of unheard of in whatever shape or form. And then we go to somebody like a Bayrak who's done, I think, which has done 50 lakhs, but then will kind of, their grant, it's going through. So if you can just cover those pieces and say how this is influencing the other VC market in the
So there is so for deep tech, so only in India we seem to use this term. So in Indian context, when you say deep tech, since most investors seem to come from IT background, they refer to IT. If you say deep science, it is something outside of IT, okay? Which is not exactly the way the other countries seem to look at. Since I co-lead the B20 task force on deep tech, I have 37 people worldwide, out of which only 2 people are from IT. The rest is all chemical, space, everything else. So the general definition, whether you say tech or science, what we consider, this is the global view. The India view is a little different because we are more solution focused. One is it is proof of science or proof of tech is not yet proven in many cases. It may be there, but it's not fully proven. The proof of market or proof of use case is maybe unknown. Third, it may involve more than one technology. And fourth, it will take much longer time. So the classical definition of TRL levels, which is actually came from NASA, which India uses with a slightly modified version. If you go to BIRAC, the TRL levels are grouped in a slightly different way. Principle is the same. The general observation from the venture capital, philanthropic capital, and the sovereign funds across the world, maybe for the last 50 years or so, is that it is called Valley of Death. The TRL 4 to TRL 7, which is basically you have a proof of concept of a concept or a principle, but you don't have anything else to show before anybody actually comes in the market for it to work. So these 3 levels. The computation for funding is about 10 million plus for a deep tech, deep science area, generally. So if you apply to an Indian context and we use all the numbers of dollars to rupees in Indian market and all that, BIRAC at 50 lakhs grant is a very liberal grant for most, since it's a grant, there is no valuation discussion. Of course, the scrutiny is tough. That is the maximum. It's not that everybody gets 50 lakhs. But that is a good one, okay? The defense one is a little different because in BIRAC, because it's biotech, you have access to wet labs. The reason why the money is very high, in most cases, unless you are doing SaaS business, your access to lab is the problem. The wet labs access is not simple. And if you're in hardware industry or in defense or materials, the capital cost is very high. So the computation of 10 million plus is coming actually from these industries. So in IDEX, while it is very good, I'd agree, there are other complications, of course, but because you need to show a certain number of solutions for them to test it. You can't make one, right? So that is the reason why the amounts are larger. Now, there are other conditions, so it's not that you can just get it like that. But that's a good move, I would say. So at a higher level, I'd say it's a good move. There are complications, but it's a good move. I would expect the same with maybe some of the computational side of things. Maybe some of the missions which the scientific principal PSC office runs, as quantum computing and other things, you may have something like that.
I mean, the space side is
Yeah, so everybody has something like that now.
Something on the
So grant capital in the TRL 1 to 3 or the early stage is now available in India. So, I mean, yeah, there is a chance of not getting it, but if you do get it, okay? There is also some kind of a follow-on capital to some extent. Afterwards, the issues start. But initially, yeah, we solve the problem most of the time. Yeah.
follow-on capital for you, Vinod. I think we'll use this back and forth to go through. So that's a tough one, right? You'll probably get to Barak, get to your process, because the moment you go to a follow-on capital, you are looking at either probably much before pre-revenue, much before product market fit. So there's no VC coming in and sitting through. So you're actually looking for angels or an angel network, or a set of people who can create a syndication who think that this is a good place to be in. So if you can just kind of run through those, what those options are, and do you think that is going to change or that needs to change?
I think, that's an interesting observation, right? I think that stage is one which is, I think, it's almost like no man's
His
land.
valley of death, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah. No man's land,
Yeah.
right? I mean, do you have people there? There are people all around looking at it. But are they willing to jump? Very few of them, right? So either you do a syndication and you try and find a set of people who are passionate enough to wanting to bet on this and sort of come together. And I still believe, and this is something that I've sort of seen, at least in the US work, we investors all tend to be penguins, right? We look for that one first person to jump, and then everybody else starts sort of getting comfort to jump. And I think that works really well. So syndications are still coming up, and I think those will probably still be the way to actually look at some of them. There are now, I think, a growing number of early stage investment pools, funds, that are starting to focus and are willing to bet on deep tech. The numbers are very small still, but I think those numbers are starting to really grow, and I think that's a good development. But I think if you really look at the number of early stage deep tech startups or entrepreneurs and the amount of capital, I think we're still lacking. And I still think there is a phenomenal opportunity there.
So is that because we are not finding deals, or we are not finding those leads who will go in and say, I'm putting my money and follow me?
I think it's more to do with the risk-taking capacity and the ability to actually be able to look at that long-term horizon and saying, do I really want to take that bet? And in my opinion, I think that number needs to start changing and becoming more. I think there are, a lot of investors at that stage who would rather invest in, more commercially viable, short-term kind of businesses rather than looking at this. So we need more and more of people who can actually look at that entire spectrum, look at the long-term and says, yeah, I think I want to take a bet on this, right? It's a moonshot.
Right.
But I still think it's worthwhile, because in my...
About the investor's ability or willingness. It's also about who they can fall back on. Who in India has the ability to fall back on technical or other resources to validate, like a Helion Energy fusion type of investment? There is no expertise locally at that level. Now, when I mentioned my comment about deep tech, I was including companies like Transcell, Pandorum, Stem Cells. We have good expertise, reference expertise that is starting to build. So my point is, in addition to the time horizon and the discounting, future discounting element, which is also very true in India, being capital starved, we have a much higher discounting rate of future returns. So we expect something, we want faster returns, we want higher returns, etc., given our alternatives. So that's one factor, we discount returns much more. But then also, we do not necessarily have the deep science where an investor can call into his network of contacts, get some validation, get support, have one technical expert, have corporates who are in that space where they can say exits, that whole element of that ecosystem, which is obviously there now in tech, in like IT tech, and much more in biotech now. Like Alpha Fund is BIRAC funded, and so we have that kind of expertise that's available more compared to, say, solar, new solar technology. If somebody wants to do a new solar energy conversion mechanism, we don't even have that because we don't have the manufacturing, right? If you want to do semiconductor, we don't have any semiconductor fab in India, so who's going to do that? So I think it's a matter of that whole set of expertise within the Indian ecosystem that is often not able to justify that deep tech investment also.
So from an IN alpha fund kind of a process, just for people, IN has a network. Alpha fund is a fund that sits on top of the network in the sense that I'm sure you can explain that you have a certain percentage that you deploy. Is that a better model for you to think differently and say that the first 5-year run is an angel run and I will double down or do that so that I can extend the runway beyond the 7-year, that a typical cycle kind?
Yeah, that's a good reference. So the network invests for any network, any deal that comes to the IN group. If it's raising 6 crore or less, we send it to the network, which is angel investors like myself or all of us who have been IN members. And then the fund does 7 crore and larger checks. Now the fund has a tenure, right? 8 + 1 + 1. But angel investors, we don't have a tenure. It's our money. We can sit. I have investments still from 2011 that are still not exited. Sometimes for good reasons, sometimes for not so good reasons, but that's still, it's an individual decision. So the tenure is, it's kind of an evergreen funding. So that is very true. You can sometimes get the benefit in angel investing to get a longer tenure, get that initial capital, to take that frontier of science, maybe do the proof of concept and find one PMF application where you kind of develop it. And then you go to venture fund for a successful follow-on, right? So the example of Pandorum or Transcell, stem cell, then they went into stem cell for oncology, and that's where the becomes more interesting for the fund or venture fund to follow up. So that's definitely what you said, definitely applies.
So just 2 more questions round, and then we'll throw it open for public question. The role of institutes. How do we encourage institutes, IVK, from your perspective? We all heard that everybody has a entrepreneurship cell, everybody has a incubation cell, everybody has some piece. Anything that can be done systematically to go back and work through? Because I still, for example, we are trying to put together something with VTU where 300 of the VTU in Karnataka are told that you don't run any more of your old projects, which were cut and paste projects, right? You have to get into, and these get you credits, right? So what do you think needs to change to get to that engineering, not just from an engineering perspective, but also from a science and engineering perspective?
That's actually a good question. So if you're in a tier 1 institute, in most cases, they do have an innovation research advisory board, which is generally a mix of industry, people from venture capital and academia. I would say maybe that should be the first port of call, because they will know both the projects, professors, and their job is actually to connect and advise. Now, you can argue with me that that is perhaps there in maybe IITs and NITs, and that may not be there in every institute. But for most of the reputed institutes across India, you will find, in fact, it's actually almost mandated, you have a scorecard which is like 50 pages, everybody has to fill, so you have to tick it. So it is required. Whether that is effective is a different argument, but it is there. So I would say maybe that will be the first port of call. The second thing is a reality which we have to confront. And here I'm taking a tier 1 institute, at an IIT-like institute or an IIT institute, how the numbers look up. The reason why it doesn't maybe get attention or capital, and hence you find that impedance if you are coming from outside. A typical expense of an IIT of Gen 1 and Gen 2 is about 1,000 crores a year. This is public domain, you can Google it. Their fee income is 10%, 100 crores. Their income otherwise on consulting and endowment returns is another 100 crores. The rest is funded by government, 800 crores. We are talking about tier 1 IITs, huh? It is 1,200 in one case, 800, it doesn't matter, but that's the rough ratio. A management institute will spend much less because it's not a tech institute, maybe 300 crores. Their fee income is higher because they charge higher. But if you go to tech institute, which is normally the hubs for your deep tech, deep science, this is the metric of a tier 1. And hence, the agenda will be pulled in many directions, one of them being innovation and research and industry, okay? So assuming that it's all there, and they are multi-department, I mean, they have every other thing available there. What I find is that there is one metric we use which is to be reversed for deep tech or deep science. Normally, most of us use the funnel metrics, and this is exactly even the central government tracks it, all right? How many got incubated, how many got registered, how many got funded, how many raised follow-on rounds, how many got acquired. It's a funnel.
Correct.
In deep tech, you should actually reverse the argument. Let the 1,000 flowers bloom, but I keep a count is how angel investors work. Here, I'll keep and nurture 50 trees which give me fruits. So it should be high intensity, low in portfolio, but high portfolio synergy. The reason is this: since I sit on the research board of IIT Gandhinagar, I see it every day that everything will be there, but there is only so much you can do in introductions. So I think one thing we kind of solved today in this decade at least, proof of science and proof of technology, we can get help and get a validation. That is not a problem. Where we have a problem is
Further nurturing.
further money or further market connection, and I can't take 100 companies to somebody. So you need a little bit of a consolidation and kind of a aggressive pruning, okay? I think that's where we still have a lot of gap in the product market side. There's a funding side gap, but I will leave that to Vinod, but I would say.
I'm going to come to that piece. I'm going to come to that piece, exactly, because then I'll throw it open for questions. So, Vinod, our fascination with this unicorn and whatever else, right? So time, what does it take to reset and say, we go deep, but we are very happy with 10x, 10 million to 100 million exits kind of stuff. The Israeli model in some ways, right? Because you don't see them talk about, they don't talk about unicorns, right? But the speciality or the gap that they fill is probably much higher from a ratio perspective. So your thoughts?
So I think, look, I mean, I think the whole unicorn idea or concept largely hyped by the media, right? If I really look at it, I think investors, at least the ones that have been around, Ravi, like you, for example, who have been around, I don't think you get overly excited when somebody says unicorn, right?
No, I was more excited when he said Dhruva and unicorn. I mean unicorn, because I still sit on the cap table of one of them.
Yeah, and for me, both of them are on my portfolio, right? I mean, so we all have that common connect amongst that. So I think it's largely a function of the media, and media had to pick something, and I think they picked it up and actually sort of really went with it. I think a lot of the investors, especially some of the ones that have come in recent times, because look, the investor ecosystem that's homegrown in India is fairly new, and it is not necessarily very deep as well, right? So I think some of those who also sort of, I think, got caught up in this whole euphoria, I think they're slowly starting to learn and understand that it takes much longer, A, to build these businesses, that it can't be built overnight, and two, that not everybody can be a unicorn. And that unicorns by themselves was just a function of that time when everybody was high of drinking, Kool-Aid. And I think that when the sugar high has now started coming down, I think everybody else is starting to realize that they're no longer that. So
you're happy to support smaller check sizes?
I'm happy to do that. And see, to me, I think
one?
ultimately for us as just like how Israel has done, or if you look at the majority of the VCs that operate across the world, right? Not everybody says, oh, I'm only investing in unicorns, I'm investing in unicorns. They all are investing in what? Good businesses, good fundamentals, good entrepreneurs who are building good businesses, and who are also giving them good exits and decent returns, right? All of them are able to do that. Now, if you're able to do that, nobody really cares and says whether I have 10 unicorns in my portfolio or whether I have one or I have zero, right? End of the day, for me as an investor, it's what returns I provide to my investors, and they're happy enough to continue to keep giving me money to go and invest.
Okay. Any questions?